Good morning, good afternoon. Distinguished panelists, dear participants, welcome to Repatriation, Reintegration, and Resocialization of Children Repatriated from Conflict Zones. This online side event is co-organized by the Permanent Mission of the Russian Federation to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva. The Special Rapporteur on the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms while Countering Terrorism, and the Bulan Institute for Peace Innovations in Geneva. Before we officially start the meeting, please allow me to highlight the key technical aspects for this panel. The language of this panel is English. Simultaneous interpretation is available in Russian. Please see the globe at the bottom center of your screen. You may select Russian or English. For participants, the microphone and video are disabled to prevent disruptions. Periodically announcements will be made in the chat box to indicate who's speaking and other relevant instructions. Please make sure that your full name appears on the screen as you join the event. Time permitting, there will be 2 Q&A sessions. The first one will be after hearing from our 4 panelists. We invite participants to ask questions in the Q&A session by typing them in the chat box or by using the raise your hand function if you wish to take the floor and speak. The technical support team will enable you to take the floor. If you are given the floor, please unmute your microphone, state your name, organization, and indicate the panelist that you would like to address your question. We kindly ask you to be brief in your comment and question to allow other participants to take the floor and allow sufficient time for panelists to respond. Given the time constraints, the speakers may not be able to respond to all questions. We and speakers may experience technical and connectivity difficulties. Thank you in advance for your patience. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. We will now have the opening statement video from His Excellency Mr. Gennady Gatilov, Permanent Representative of the Russian Federation to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, to officially start the event.
Excellencies, Special Rapporteur, Children's Rights Commissioner, dear participants, thank you for your interest in today's discussion. I am honored to open this side event, which is organized by the UN Special Rapporteur on the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms while Countering Terrorism, the Bulan Institute for Peace Innovations in Geneva, and the Permanent Mission of the Russian Federation to the United Nations in Geneva. We have decided to focus today's discussion on an issue of paramount importance: the protection of the rights of children repatriated from conflict zones, particularly their rehabilitation, reintegration, and resocialization. I regret to note that hostilities in various countries around the world have resulted in children, members of families of fighters or terrorists, facing brutal violence and finding themselves in dire humanitarian circumstances. The COVID-19 pandemic further negatively impacts these children as it prevents their repatriation and reunification with family members. There is no doubt that states should protect the human rights of children under international law, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child. With regard to armed conflicts, states have a duty to repatriate their nationals and to take steps to prevent children of their nationals from becoming stateless. States should assume the primary responsibility of protecting these children and ensuring their safe return home. We need to treat children as children, not as terrorists. The best interests of the child should always be a primary consideration. the future of children repatriated from conflict zones are crucial aspects of today's international agenda. I would like to acknowledge Professor Aolain's personal engagement in this process. Let me underline that the Russian Federation, as well as other countries, make meaningful efforts in this regard. Ms. Anna Kuznetsova, Children's Rights Commissioner for the President of the Russian Federation, has done enormous work in searching for, identifying, repatriating, and rehabilitating children from Iraqi and Syrian camps. This experience has generated valuable lessons which may be useful to other states that have already repatriated or are committed to repatriating their nationals or are addressing the situations of individuals who have returned on their own. We believe such examples should serve as an inspiration for other states. I am sure this meeting will provide an opportunity to discuss difficulties and challenges of the process of repatriating, reintegrating, and resocializing children, possible ways of strengthening international cooperation in this field, as well as what can be done, including by the United Nations Human Rights Council, in fostering progress to this end. I wish all the participants an interesting and fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Colleagues, please convey our thanks to Ambassador Gatilov for his words. We will now move to our distinguished panelists. Our first speaker is Professor Fenula Neolain, United Nations Special Rapporteur for the Promotion and Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms while Countering Terrorism. Professor Neolain is Regents Professor and Arena Professor of Law, Public Policy and Society at the University of Minnesota Law School and Professor of Law at the Queen's University in Belfast, Northern Ireland. She was appointed Special Rapporteur in 2017 and is currently in her second term of the mandate. Special Rapporteur, you have the floor.
Thank you, colleagues, and thank you to all for joining us today. I am particularly pleased to have this opportunity, and the mandate is particularly pleased to be co-hosting this event. We're enormously welcoming of this opportunity to work again with the Russian Federation, and I welcome the ambassador's warm and prescient remarks, and particularly his affirmation of the application and value of the protection of the rights of the child through the prism of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We also again welcome the opportunity to cooperate with the Bulan Institute and to be joined by the Children's Rights Commissioner for the President of the Russian Federation and UNICEF for this very important dialogue to learn and to share good practice and to show what can be done in really difficult contexts. So as many of you will know, the Special Rapporteur's mandate has engaged directly with governments on the issue of return and repatriation with a clear focus on the rights of the child. In Kazakhstan, a long time ago when we used to travel, it seems like a long time ago, but only last May, my team and I had the opportunity to see at firsthand the repatriation measures that had been successfully implemented by the government, which repatriated through several operations over 700 individuals, primarily women and children. We visited the repatriation center and we spent significant time with the women and the children who'd been repatriated. I also want to note that we've enjoyed close cooperation, particularly with the Russian Federation, and we're in a process of learning and engagement that has just started with the Office of the Children's Rights Commissioner. And here I want to underscore the value of this engagement between special procedures and national human rights institutions as an important way of deepening the dialogue from the Human Rights Council and special procedures more generally. The mandate has also advanced its position through engagement in several judicial proceedings, in an amicus brief before the European Court of Human Rights, in proceedings concerning the stripping of nationality in the United Kingdom, and we've also engaged successfully with several governments on individual cases, including Canada and Ireland, which successfully returned an orphan child and a mother and child, respectively, from camps in northeast Syria. We have also recently commended recent returns by Finland and Belgium and encourage and support repatriation by states. Many of you will know that the mandate prepared recently with 15 other special procedures mandate holders an important communication on the situation of third country nationals in the camps in northeast Syria, which has been sent to 57 governments who have reportedly have citizens deprived of liberty in these camps. This communication addresses a range of issues, including issues linked to humanitarian access, the processes and the security, the detention and the treatment of individuals deprived of their liberty. And the communication will become fully public on the 27th of March. Let me talk about the position of the mandate legally on return and repatriation. We've been very clear and consistent, but it's worth repeating today. The return and repatriation of foreign fighters and their families, especially children from conflict zones, is the only international law compliant response to the complex and precarious human rights, humanitarian and security situation faced by men, women, and particularly children who are detained in inhumane conditions in these overcrowded camps. Such return, in my view, is a comprehensive response, and it amounts to a positive implementation of Security Council resolutions 2178 of 2014 and 2396 of 2017. In the mandate's view, states have a duty to act with due diligence and take positive steps, and we are particularly responsive to and aware of the states who have taken positive steps and effective measures to protect vulnerable individuals located outside their territories, where we know and we have documented that they are at serious risk of human rights violations, and where the state's actions or omissions can positively impact on these individual rights, particularly the rights of children. Let me be clear also, we all know, and the ambassador has underscored, how repatriation processes and post-repatriation and rehabilitation measures must comply with international law. The mandate also makes clear that the absolute principle of non-refoulement must be protected. And we know and we're aware that the management of this will require joint efforts, coordination, and further engagement, including in the governments, but also involving the United Nations. We make clear that prosecution, or whether there's absent prosecution or extradition, repatriation should always be voluntary and safe. And post-repatriation measures have to comply with the absolute prohibition on torture, ill treatment, and arbitrary deprivation of liberty. In relation to children, and again underscoring what the ambassador has said as he opened our dialogue today, the mandate has made clear that states must treat children, including children related to or associated with designated terrorist groups, primarily as victims when devising their responses, including counterterrorism responses, and the best interest of the child is the primary consideration. States must ensure, and we have seen this firsthand, that even where a child is considered a potential security risk, or where the child's interest conflicts with the state's perceived national security interest, that the state is consistent and aware of the importance of non-discrimination and avoiding stigmatization of children on the basis of their perceived affiliations. Children should not have to carry the terrible burden of simply being born to individuals related to or associated with designated terrorist groups. Children didn't make choices to be born in these contexts. And it's clear that where we see policy choices that lead to a lowering of children's human rights protection because of their parents or extended family members being related or associated with terrorist groups, that this violates the key principle of non-discrimination against those children. In this respect, the mandate has also raised its concerns regarding the separation of children from their mothers and other family members, absent a thorough assessment of what is their best interest. I also want to close by being mindful of the critical need to understand what it means for many, particularly women and girls, to be associated with terrorist groups. We have urged states to be mindful, and my team and I have met firsthand with women and girls who have experienced coercion, co-option, grooming, trafficking, enslavement, and sexual exploitation. And that all of those matters, which we take so seriously in so many other places, have to be taken into account in this context as we examine the agency and the choices of women and girls, implying and being clear that what we need here is individualized assessment. Also, I would just underscore, as I did at the council last week, that we need to be focused on the gender-specific traumas and the human rights violations that have been experienced by women and girls in the context of detention, and the ways in which their physical and mental health has been impacted. And most of all, that if they are victims already, we're not perpetuating or contributing to further victimization. We are really concerned that what we are seeing in the camps are multiple and intersecting human rights and humanitarian law violations, and that these violations are directly impacting children from their detention. Children who are deprived of their liberty in camps are victims on multiple grounds, and they continue to be denied the protection to which they're entitled. They lack a clear legal basis for detention, no review, no process, inhumane conditions of detention, a lack of basic care, food, shelter from the elements, safe water, adequate sanitations, sexual and other forms of abuse, so that the situation is not only severe, but it is compounded severity for these children. So what we have to make sure is that we are seeking to address immediately and with urgency the ongoing intersection of these multiple human rights and humanitarian law challenges. We've said clearly that recovery and reintegration and family unification has to be prioritized, and taking all feasible means to ensure the protection and care of children affected by armed conflict. We want to make sure that we promote the physical and psychological recovery of children and their social integration. And I think what we're going to hear about examples, particularly the work of being undertaken in the Russian Federation, is the implementation of those kinds of practices in real time, and so urgently needed in so many other contexts. Finally, let me close by saying that what we need is political will and courage. We need a political discourse that talks about children as children, a political discourse that uses words like care and responsibility, rather than the highlighting and the elevation of risk in the context of the rights of the child. And so for me as mandate holder and my team, we will continue to engage with governments. We continue to be grateful and aware of those governments who are working really hard to solve this problem. And so we look forward to hearing more and to acknowledging and supporting the governments who continue to try to find resolution in very practical terms to this challenging political, legal, and humanitarian crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur. Our second panelist is Ms. Anna Kuznetsova, Children's Rights Commissioner for the President of the Russian Federation. Ms. Kuznetsova is a graduate teacher and psychologist. She has been personally engaged in searching, identifying, and repatriation of children from Iraqi and Syrian camps. In her work, she devotes much attention to rehabilitation, resocialization, and reintegration of children. Before giving her the floor, she has asked us to play a short video.
Уважаемые коллеги, рада приветствовать вас на 46-й сессии Совета ООН по правам человека. И мы уже не первый раз встречаемся для обсуждения вопросов защиты прав и свобод самых маленьких граждан наших государств. И, уважаемые коллеги, я хочу поздравить нас с этим. Поздравить нас с тем, что мы сделали не просто шаг вперед, мы сделали существенный рывок навстречу этим детям. Я прекрасно помню, как начиналась и какова была риторика в самом начале работы. Нам говорили: вы везете террористов. Нам говорили: у этих детей плохие родители, а не преступники. Что сделали мы в ответ? Россия и другие государства, которые стали возвращать детей. Мы показали этих детей, маленьких, беспомощных, голодных, выросших в жутких условиях. Многие из них не говорят, многие выглядят возрастом гораздо младше, чем есть на самом деле. И, уважаемые коллеги, я вижу огромную заслугу в том, что на каждой площадке присутствуют люди, которые постоянно интересуются этой темой, которые своими руками двигают ее вперед, двигают ее навстречу защите детей. А также каждый раз я вижу, что присоединяются новые участники, распространяя эту и помогая, и укрепляя, и помогая нам вместе добиться решения этого важного вопроса. Когда в 2018 году по поручению президента России Владимира Владимировича Путина началась эта масштабная работа, мы были одними из первых государств в решении многих вопросов. И на тот момент не было ни четких алгоритмов возвращения детей, не была сформирована нормативно-правовая база этого процесса. И фактически не было опыта. Мы шли на ощупь в темноте и по лезвию ножа, учитывая непростую международную, внутригосударственную и иные политические вопросы, в которых реализована была наша работа. Сегодня нами разработан действенный механизм возвращения наших детей на родину, который предусматривает все нюансы этой работы. От выявления ребенка на территории другого государства, установления родственников, подтверждения родства, оформления всех необходимых документов и возвращения, а дальше социализации, реинтеграции, реабилитации ребенка. Безусловно, важным условием успеха российской программы по возвращению детей является уважительное отношение к нормам права других государств, на территории которых реализуются наши программы. И видите в ролике, что все наши программы легализованы на территории других государств и поддержаны руководством этих государств. И были согласованы с руководством Ирака, с руководством Сирии. Все эти программы известны и поддержаны руководством этих государств. За весь период нашей работы в Россию 12 спецрейсов было осуществлено, 274 ребенка нашли свою семью здесь, в России. Ни один из детей не попал в сиротское учреждение. Мы разыскиваем наших детей не только на территории Сирии, Ирака. И, уважаемые коллеги, это тоже важный нюанс. Недавно мы установили, что дети, которые находятся на территории лагеря Аль-Холь, Рош, на территории лагерей, они могут находиться и в других государствах, например, на территории Турции. Они туда переходят из лагеря Аль-Холь и из других лагерей под давлением тяжелых условий, невыносимых условий жизни. Вот в настоящий момент, например, на территории Турции мы обнаружили 36 детей. России уже взяты пробы ДНК, и начался процесс возвращения их на родину. Я сама неоднократно бывала и в Сирии, и была в Ираке, своими глазами видела весь этот ужас, в котором находятся дети. И сейчас я понимаю, насколько важна та работа, которую мы делаем, особенно когда видим счастливые фотографии детей, которых мы вернули уже сюда, в Россию, на родину. Сегодня мы видим эту интенсивную заинтересованность других государств в обмене опытом по возвращению детей, по обмену опытом в их социализации и адаптации. Только за последний год с нашим участием прошло порядка 20 рабочих встреч, совещаний, конференций, круглых столов, форумов различного уровня по вопросам защиты прав несовершеннолетних, по обмену опытом, по спасению детей из горячих точек. Это мероприятие с коллегами из Финляндии, Казахстана, Узбекистана, Бельгии, ряда других стран, стран СНГ, европейских государств, и это очень правильно. Это говорит о растущем запросе на решение существующей проблемы. Безусловно, необходимо наращивать и масштабы, и темпы этой работы, и, к сожалению, сейчас программа по возвращению своих несовершеннолетних граждан реализует лишь ряд государств. В основном это всего несколько десятков вывезенных несовершеннолетних, а там их, к сожалению, насколько нам известно, тысячи. Есть данные, что только в лагерях беженцев на территории Сирии, в тюрьмах Ирака, по различным оценкам, находятся представители более 60 государств. Конечно, детям не место там, где идут боевые столкновения, где гибнут люди, где дети оказываются незащищенными ни морально, ни физически, где, по сути, нарушаются все их права. И они попали, как совершенно справедливо сказано сегодня, не по своей воле. И, конечно, они не должны нести ответственность за своих родителей. Поэтому важно как можно скорее усилить эту работу. По данному вопросу есть решение ООН, и эта тема обсуждается на площадках ОБСЕ. Есть резолюция Европарламента об обязательной репатриации детей из зон конфликтов. Многие страны высказываются в поддержку этих решений, и сейчас нам важно консолидировать усилия в этом направлении. И с учетом уже имеющегося опыта координировать эти действия. Только так мы сможем помочь как можно большему числу наших детей, которые в данный момент находятся в ужасной опасности. Мы понимаем, как непросто выработать системность этой работы. Мы готовы оказывать содействие, так как мы прошли через все пути выстраивания этой работы на территории своего государства, подключение различных ведомств, а сегодня несколько ведомств России работают по этой программе, благодаря действующему поручению, исполнению поручения президента. И, конечно, таким образом эта работа, с одной стороны, являясь новой для всех нас, является фундаментальной. Новый, потому что это относительно новая задача, а фундаментальный, потому что это защита детства, очень простая и понятная каждому из нас, вне зависимости от должности, от статуса, от наших профессиональных знаний, умений, навыков. Безусловно, большое значение имеет не только возвращение детей, но и их реабилитация. Так как уже более несколько сотен детей вернулись в Россию, мы усиленно работаем над вторым этапом. Это реабилитация и социализация детей на родине. На территории чужого для них государства они оказались заложниками ошибок своих родителей. Но нельзя допустить, чтобы у себя на родине не попали в другие сети или вообще оказались в социальном вакууме. Этого делать ни в коем случае нельзя. Нужны проработанные программы по социализации и адаптации таких детей, а также интеграции их в общество. Они у нас есть, и разработанный нами механизм включает в себя как раз комплексный подход. И сюда помимо непосредственно эвакуации детей входит обязательная реабилитация, адаптация, социализация несовершеннолетних. В каждом регионе, куда отправляется ребенок, выработаны свои индивидуальные подходы. Например, в Республике Дагестан за каждым ребенком, вне зависимости от возраста, закреплены 5 специалистов. Педагог-психолог, врач, представитель комиссии по делам несовершеннолетних, сотрудник муфтията или духовный наставник, а также в обязательном порядке подключают представителей общественных организаций. Бесценную помощь оказывают коллеги, уполномоченные по правам ребенка в регионах, они координируют эту работу. В целом в субъектах Российской Федерации работа выстраивается по нескольким направлениям. Первое – это работа с семьей. Начиная с подбора семьи, куда возвращается ребенок, это, как правило, семьи родственников, и завершая сопровождением после того, как ребенок помещен в эту семью. Второе – забота о здоровье. Это такой медицинский аспект. Все дети проходят обязательно медицинское обследование сразу по прилету в Россию. В случае выявления каких-либо проблем со здоровьем или необходимости длительного лечения, они его получают. Третье – образование. Сложный момент. Каждому ребенку необходимо применять такой индивидуальный подход, потому что многие дети, особенно школьного возраста, конечно, они находятся в таком запущенном состоянии, программу образовательную нужно наверстывать для того, чтобы они не оказались белой вороной в своей возрастной группе. Четвертое. Дополнительное образование. В зависимости от предпочтений и увлечений каждого ребенка дети занимаются или спортом, или рисованием, или иным видом творчества и искусства. В этом им оказывают активную поддержку региональные министерства спорта, Министерство культуры. Так, например, при содействии Министерства спорта в Дагестане был организован шахматный турнир, и ребята, которые увлекались этим видом спорта, продолжают совершенствоваться в этом направлении. Конечно, увлечения у ребят разные. Кто-то увлекается футболом, с ними занимается тренер, кто-то рисованием. И сейчас в качестве победителей конкурса даже получили сертификаты и право заниматься у любого мастера. Вот это вот очень такие интересные победы, которые становятся нам известными. Честно сказать, радуешься, как за своих детей, когда вот эти ребятишки, несмотря на все сложности, которые им пришлось преодолеть, да, те многие тысячи километров, которые они прошли до своей нормальной мирной жизни, они все-таки имеют большой реабилитационный потенциал. И пятое, коллеги, последнее – это наставничество. Во многих регионах за детьми закрепляются наставники, люди, которые готовы помочь, подсказать, направить. Это представители общественных организаций, это могут быть иные специалисты, могут быть ребята более старшего возраста, порой детям нужен именно такой наставник, за которым можно идти, следовать и кому хочется подражать. Во взаимодействии с общественными организациями я вижу большой потенциал для этой работы, и, конечно, мы стараемся приглашать их к активному участию. Вся эта работа способствует интеграции детей в общество, опираясь на опыт вот этой нашей работы по возвращению детей на родину. Конечно, мы видим, что у ребят большой потенциал, и хочется, чтобы он все-таки был раскрыт. Сегодня на этот счет есть несколько исследований российских ученых, которые изучали особенности психических и поведенческих нарушений у детей, освобожденных из иракской тюрьмы. Прошло достаточно времени, и это исследование уже проведено. Они также говорят о хорошем потенциале для адаптации и социализации детей и их интеграции в общество. Сейчас, опираясь на успешный опыт социализации и реинтеграции детей в регионах, идет формирование стандартов этой работы на федеральном уровне. Разрабатывается единый подход к организации работы, и, коллеги, в этом направлении нам еще предстоит посотрудничать, обмениваться опытом, презентовать и обсуждать, анализировать лучшие практики, обмениваться мнением специалистов, и, возможно, это следующий шаг для нашей работы, когда уже многие государства вернут своих детей, нам будет о чем поговорить и обменяться лучшими практиками. Уважаемые коллеги, в заключение скажу, что важно не только сейчас обмениваться методиками, определять наилучшие практики государств, но и по возможности, понимая, конечно, все сложности работы, переходить к следующему этапу сотрудничества. Это повышение эффективности самих этих программ, которые реализует государство. Вместе мы можем это сделать. Объединив усилия, мы сможем преодолеть те сложности внешнеполитические, внутриполитические, которые есть, поставив ребенка над политикой. Именно этот подход позволяет раскрывать те потенциалы, которые есть у международных организаций, у должностных лиц на территории государств, которые курируют эту работу. И именно это является ключом к тому бедственному положению, в котором находятся эти дети. И, повернув его, мы сможем вернуть своих детей, спасти их жизни, а также, еще раз хочу подчеркнуть, проявить ту ответственную позицию, заботу о детях всего мира, говоря, и здесь я говорю о прекращении этого террористического круга, который закручивает этих детей в случае, если они выживут. Этот страшный вал терроризма может захлестнуть и их. Поэтому, коллеги, мы спасаем жизни не только этих детей. Здесь важно понимать всю глубину этого значения этой работы. Поэтому, уважаемые коллеги, мы со своей стороны готовы участвовать в усилении этой деятельности. Мы готовы подключаться к тем инициативам, которые есть. И, конечно, для тех государств, которые еще не определились со своей позицией, мне хочется сказать, приехайте к этим детям, подержите один раз их за руку, голодных, испуганных, молчаливых, и вы обязательно вернетесь за тем, чтобы забрать своих детей. Спасибо, уважаемые коллеги, за ваше внимание к этой теме, за ту огромную работу, которая сегодня ведется на площадке ООН. И мои надежды по эффективному и успешному разрешению этой проблемы связаны с объединением усилий. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Madam, for your words. I now invite Ms. Afshan Khan. Ms. Khan is the UNICEF Regional Director for Europe and Central Asia and the Special Coordinator for the Refuge and Migrant Response in Europe. Ms. Khan has been an international public servant for over 30 years. Previously, she was the Director of Emergency Programs for UNICEF. Ms. Khan has broad United Nations-wide expertise and extensive field experience. Ms. Khan, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. It's an honor to join such a distinguished panel, to follow on Professor Fiona Niolan, and also Anna Kuznetsova, the Children's Rights Commissioner for the President of the Russian Federation, as well as Ms. Choplon Orozodobovka for her tremendously, I think, insightful notes on the recent repatriations. I'd also like to thank the permanent representative of the Russian Federation to the United Nations, Gennady Gatilov, for helping organize this panel along with the platform of the University of Minnesota. So for UNICEF, I do want to say both to member state representatives, UN colleagues, and others on the panel, the invitation to address the Council on this critical child rights issue is extremely important, because as we meet here today, it's 10 years of conflict inside Syria. It's tens of thousands of children in Northeast Syria remaining trapped in a crisis not of their own making. Some of them were taken to Syria by someone whose job it was to protect them. When many were born into the situation they now find themselves. And I think we need to remember that the bulk of the children are under 5 years of age. And that's really important to recognize when we're repatriating. And some have endured and witnessed atrocities. So the imperative for local authorities and member states to work together for their release, repatriation, and reintegration has never been more urgent. Last month, a 9-year-old orphan girl named Zara died in Al-Hol camp. She needed kidney dialysis. In order to get medical treatment, she had to receive permission to leave the camp and be escorted to the hospital by an adult. Zara's foster mother was caring for 8 children and could not make the weekly trips required for her treatment. Zara's death was preventable. The camps and detention facilities in Northeast Syria and Iraq are full of similar acute and urgent cases. There are thousands of children with complex medical and mental health needs, none of which can be supported in their current location. And thousands more are in medically stable condition, but find themselves without protection to adequate health care or education. We know that the political will of member states remains the single most important factor in accelerating the repatriation of children. And we have witnessed, even during a global pandemic, that repatriations are possible, and that successful community and family-based reintegration of these children can be achieved. More than 2,000 children have already been repatriated from Syria and Iraq. These children are rebuilding their lives with support of their families, social workers, and teachers. Let me share with you the story of Zokir, a 13-year-old boy who returned to his home country in Central Asia in 2019. Upon review of the case, the authorities determined that his mother had not made an informed decision to travel to Syria and issued a decision that supported the mother, Zokir and his 3 siblings, to move into an apartment in the capital city. Zokir enrolled in school but lagged behind his peers, having been deprived of 7 years of schooling while in Syria. He had frequent nightmares and was afraid to be close to windows, which was conditioned in order to avoid explosions, stray bullets, and other risks. But within just 1 year of returning home, Zokir had already made extraordinary progress. With support from his mother, a supplementary tutor, a social worker who helped the family get access to services they need, the boy advanced 3 full academic years. He has made friends in the community and joined a soccer club. And Zokir's nightmares are much less frequent as he slowly adjusts to the prospect of living in peace. Zokir's story is also not all that unique. What UNICEF is seeing across the caseload of children returning, whether to Central Asia, Europe, or North America, is that the recipe for successful reintegration is surprisingly simple: the restoration of childhood. We have witnessed this in young children whose reintegration is often very straightforward. We have seen some complex cases where children have been instrumentalized and abused. And ladies and gentlemen, the learning is clear, and you have heard it from the other panelists. Children recover from these experiences in family-based care that enables community reintegration. A number of countries, including the Russian Federation, have shared approaches that recognize the need for a community-based approach to reintegration. Placing all returning children in family-based care, as indicated by Commissioner Kuznetsova, is an impressive accomplishment. We fully agree with the suggestion that Ms. Kuznetsova made of sharing and exchanging best practices and experiences so we can learn and shape the approaches that best make possible the restoration of a child's childhood. While there are a number of good practices to highlight, UNICEF has also seen problematic approaches and language, particularly around older children. Some countries have asserted arbitrary age cutoffs in their repatriation policies. Others have insisted on an institutional or de-radicalization approach to returnees, particularly with older children who may have more pronounced memories of the conflict they endured. And others have sought to systematically separate families without consideration for the long-term consequences on children or the need to establish best interest on an individual basis, as Professor Nialon called for. UNICEF is calling on member states and local authorities to implement their international commitments and take responsibility for the rights of all children who are their nationals in Northeast Syria. Children should never be detained based solely on suspected family ties or relatives' membership in armed groups. Similarly, the fulfillment of their rights and our pursuit of their best interest cannot be made conditional on the legal status, alleged identity, or perceived affiliation of their parents. A child is a child. As members of the Human Rights Council, you all have an important role to play. UNICEF remains committed to supporting member states in their application of the Convention on the Rights of the Child to this extremely vulnerable group of children. There are no local solutions for foreign children in Syria and Iraq. These children are counting on us. We must not fail them again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khan. I see that we have a couple of questions already for our panelists. And we also have I'll also motivate all our participants to raise their hand to ask the questions. We'll very much like to hear from you. We have now one of the participants that is wishing to take the floor.
So should I continue, Michelle?
Chogon, just wait a second, please. We've had one of our participants who wanted to take the floor. They're asking us, our technicians, to please give her.
Good afternoon. Can I take the floor right now?
Yes, please. Welcome.
Good afternoon to you and to all colleagues and panelists, and thank you very much for convening this panel discussion, very important panel discussion, and I would like to congratulate all the organizers and the panelists. In fact, this panel is very important as it tackles a very complex and complicated matter with different aspects, whether humanitarian or political and legal aspects. And I think this discussion helps to better understand those different aspects. But it also serves in setting an example or addressing best practices in dealing with this matter. In this regard, I would like to commend the efforts exerted by the Russian Federation, by Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and other countries in doing their best to repatriate their children and their subject in cooperation with the Syrian government. And as Commissioner Kuznetsova has said, this issue needs, those who deal with this issue need to deeply understand the complexity of this matter and the different political and legal aspects. We are faced with a problem which is a result of policies adopted by Western governments who have facilitated the travel of their nationals to join terrorist organizations fighting in Syria. And we are faced with a problem in Al-Hol camp and other places, other camps in northeastern Syria, as a result of the lack of political will by those governments to repatriate their citizens and shy away from their legal obligations to that end. But as I said, I think what Russia and others did sets a good practice. I took the floor to say a couple of things. First of all, we understand the complexity of the matter, and we have been doing our best to facilitate, in cooperation with ICRC, the humanitarian response to the needs of those who are in those camps. And we have been doing our best to cooperate with different governments who are serious about repatriating their citizens. I have listened carefully to what has been said by the special rapporteur, and I have seen also the communication that she has made reference to, where I read repeatedly, and I heard today, references to working with local authorities in repatriating those children. And here I would like to draw the attention to what I call a bad practice by some governments who are using the humanitarian suffering of their citizens and their children to continue with their policies which are trying to undermine the sovereignty of Syria. They are using this humanitarian issue as a means to undermine the sovereignty of Syria and trying to give some sort of legality to those illegal entities who are present and operating in that part of Syria. I heard the special rapporteur speaking about the need to engage with different governments, and here I would like to underline the need to engage with the Syrian government on this matter, and urge her and other UN officials in their appeals to solve this issue. They need to stress the need to respect the provisions of international law and the need not to compromise the sovereignty of concerned. Having said that, again, I would like to reiterate that my government stands ready to do what we can do and to do its best in contributing to solving this humanitarian issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I will give the floor shortly to Ms. Neoline and then to Ms. Kuznetsov.
Thank you, colleagues, and just to thank the ambassador for his intervention, and I think it underscores both the complexity of the situation in which we are in, as he acknowledged and recognizes, and the need to have engaged in sustained dialogues. This is a collective action problem. We're all clearly aware that this is a collective action problem and that it will only be solved in its full extent and complexity by the engagement of all actors. And the mandate welcomes the engagement of the government and the dialogue and the presence at this discussion, which we think is both helpful and really illuminates the stakes that some are so patently aware and obvious for all of us. So thank you, Ambassador, for your remarks. Michelle.
Special Rapporteur.
So I know we're running over time, which tells us how interesting the conversation has been and how much interest by member states and others there is in this question. So we're very grateful for that. I want to acknowledge there were 2 questions from the TASS news agency in the chat. One, I think, which we've addressed is what can be done by the international community to help resolve this problem. And I think the answer is viewing this as a collective action problem, which revolves and involves the collective action of states with a focus on a human rights-based approach, particularly to address this question of reintegration and return. We've also been asked to address the question of unilateral sanctions, and I would just simply say the mandate has addressed the issue of sanctions in its most recent report to the Human Rights Council, and particularly addressed the impact of sanctions on women and girls, and underscored the importance of ensuring that sanctions regimes do not have adverse impact on socioeconomic rights. And I would underscore that today. Let me just close by saying that we're so grateful for the conversation. I think what I walk away with is the importance of centralizing the rights of the child in these discussions. As we were reminded by UNICEF, we are facing a 10-year anniversary. And in that context of that, an anniversary is really the wrong word when we think of the scale of the challenges we're facing. But one of the things that comes out loudly and clearly is the need to address long-term solutions to the problem we're facing. And in particular, being reminded that Al-Hol and Raj camps are populations made up primarily of children. So we need to change our discourse. It starts with the language we use to describe what the problem is. And here, where we use the language of rights of the child, best interest of the child, care, compassion, and responsibility for children, we're not just prioritizing a human rights language, but in the long term, we're prioritizing security, both short, medium, and long-term security for those children, for the region, and for the countries they come from. I think we also need to draw on and use the experience of UN entities like UNICEF, who are deeply engaged in this issue and have the resources and the capacity to support states and work closely with the kind of extraordinary work we're seeing in the Russian Federation from a network of national human rights institutions focused on children's rights. And that is the kind of solutions that we need to be seeing in many other contexts. I would just finally close by saying that in many contexts, the issue of repatriation is framed as a security issue, which is at the expense of addressing the balance between security and human rights. Security is a human rights, and in order to solve this problem, we need a human rights-based approach to addressing the needs of children, but also ensuring the long-term security of states by addressing the needs of these children. So the two go hand in hand. And I thank us all for joining, and really pleased to have such an exceptional all-female panel, and glad to have had this conversation and hope that it's the first of many.
Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur. We have run out of time for our event, and we hope to continue this discussion and the cooperation. Dear panelists, dear participants, thank you very much for the positive and fruitful discussion. Thank you to the interpreters and to the co-organizers. It has been a pleasure to share this afternoon with you. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you.